So the NFL trade deadline's officially come and gone. Max and I recorded our first show, and then I had an opportunity to take a nap. He made some dinner, so some much needed time away from the computer to not talk Bears because this team is either making you rip your head out, or I'm sorry, making you rip your hair out, or they are legitimately making you watch every single game. But then some way, somehow, you still find a reason to be mad, annoyed, or pissed off. But that's what happens when you're a diehard analyst as well as fan. What's up, guys? Welcome into the Fireside Bears YouTube channel. Usayd, Kosho, and Max Smith here. You can follow us on Twitter at Usayd Kosho and at Max Smith ESM. Follow Max on Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, TikTok, and Instagram at Fireside Bears. Max, how was the dinner you made? Because I already asked you how your day is going.
Yeah, dinner was delicious. Good to be back. If you're watching our 49ers recap video, you'll notice that nothing's changed. We're still here, so this is fun. Kind of knocking out back to back. We had a little trade deadline reach at 4 p.m. Eastern time today. What a snooze fest, really, across the league. There are a couple teams that got active. Noticeably, one that did not, however, was the Chicago Bears. To many fans' surprise, to some analysts' surprise as well. And to some rumors around the league where people scratching their heads going, I thought we were going to move a guy, or we thought Robinson was going to get shipped, or Akeem Hicks. So we have a couple things that we want to run down real quick. This won't be like a huge long video. We're going to talk about why the Bears didn't sell at the deadline. There's a clear reason why, and that has to do with Ryan Pace. What does that mean for the Bears for the rest of the season if they really didn't come out as heavy sellers? We're going to discuss why we weren't surprised, or we were surprised why Akeem Hicks wasn't moved, or A-Rob. And then we're going to talk about anything else that just kind of falls in between. But to start off, you said, why do you think the Bears decided to not be heavy sellers at this deadline?
Well, I think it all goes back to Ryan Pace and Matt Nagy. And disclaimer, take Matt Nagy out of the picture for just a second. Ryan Pace has been the GM of the Bears for what, 7 seasons now? In 7 seasons, he's made one trade deadline move, which was acquiring Dontrell Inman in 2017 from the then San Diego Chargers for what was like a conditional 6th or 7th round draft choice. And another thing I think I find very interesting about the trade deadline just comes down to the fact that every single year it seems like the Bears are linked to one big name player that they could possibly trade for. I know a couple of years ago when Jarvis Landry was in Miami, it was always, oh my God, could the Bears trade Jarvis, or could the Bears trade for Jarvis Landry? This year, though, it was kind of the opposite in the sense that you had some people thinking, okay, could the Bears really ship out one of their big name guys like a Hicks or an Allen Robinson? And again, someone like Akeem Hicks may just be another defensive lineman on any other team in the NFL. But considering how much he's brought to the Bears defense in terms of talent, passion, effort, energy, as well as the biggest thing of all, scheme fit, you know what? He's more than just another defensive lineman. But overall, I'm not surprised the Bears didn't sell at the deadline. I mean, you look at this entire core, you look at some of it, it's under contract through 2022, 2023, 2024, even if you're counting guys like Khalil Mack, Cody Whitehair, Eddie Jackson. What the Bears are basically saying right now by standing pat at the trade deadline is, hey, we're okay with what we have. We're okay with the roster we've assembled. A majority of this roster, outside some of the small free agent signings as well as the rookie class, was in a playoff game just 10 months ago. So we fully believe that this roster, which again saw some turnover at both tackle positions, at the quarterback position, added some new faces to the wide receiver, the running back room, added new faces along the defensive line and the cornerback room. The Bears fully believe that despite all the turnover, we are still ready to go ahead and compete for a playoff spot. And by the way, no one should be surprised that Ryan Pace said in his pre-draft presser back in the April of 2021 during the offseason, hey, we have a playoff ready roster, and the strength of the roster, or the strength of the roster, is the defense. And so ultimately the Bears are kind of looking at this and saying, so what? We just lost 3 straight to Tampa Bay, Green Bay, as well as San Francisco. No big deal that we dropped an opening season game to the Rams. You know what? We're going to chug along here. And so there's two ways to view this. 50% of it is, you know what? It's good that the front office is confident in what's on the roster and can do and wants to do everything it can to get the job done. But then the other 50% of it is that you also have to look at this, right? You have to look at, and again, Mike Ditka kind of said this when he got hired as head coach of the Bears. He's just like, in his opening team meeting, I think in 82 or 83, he's like, listen, give me 3 years. We're going to get to the Super Bowl. The bad news is half you guys won't be here. Well, guess what? This year's Mike Ditka is essentially Justin Fields. You know why? Because give this roster 3 years and look at this roster right now. Who are going to be the players that are going to be here and who's not going to be here? That's all that really matters. And so ultimately for the Bears, you could say, okay, it's good that they sat on their hands and didn't give anything up to acquire anyone. But then you could also say it's bad because some of this roster is just not going to be here in 3 years ultimately. And so the Bears are going to lose some of these guys like Hicks and Robinson for essentially nothing. And Jimmy Graham, by the way, who's got the lowest trade value of any player on the roster right now.
Yeah, the thing, there's a couple things that I want to go on, but I mostly agree with you that I'm not stunned that the Bears weren't sellers, much to my dismay. I'm in the affirmative and I'm in that kind of group that says we need to blow things up, that I'm like more than willing to accept that the first attempt didn't work. We created a formula to be the most mediocre team in the NFC and sneak into 2 wild card spots in the past 4 years. But unfortunately, the roster I don't think is competitive enough to be a playoff roster consistently, like Ryan Pace so positively thinks it is. But this is Ryan Pace's 7th year with the Chicago Bears. We've been, 45 and 59 in those 7 years. And the roster that you're looking at right now is entirely Ryan Pace's roster. These are all guys that Ryan Pace has brought on board outside of maybe, I'm still confident, pretty sure Danny Trevathan's on there. Maybe not. He's still there from the John Fox days. But what selling right now would mean is Ryan Pace looking at this organization and basically going, I'm giving up. These are my guys that I brought here, signed these contracts, worked with the coaching staff. This is the team that I built. This is the roster I put together. And now I'm going to sell it all because we're 3-5 and things aren't looking good. And I'm going to leave in the sun, in the summer and find some cushy spot somewhere else in the NFL because I'm still going to have a job because I'm well connected and I'm well respected amongst the league. So I'm honestly not that surprised that that's not what happened because I wouldn't be in that. I don't think I'd want to be in that scenario if I was Ryan Pace. It's a really defeating, really kind of bad mindset to have to just go, yeah, no, I'm going to sell my entire team. Or at least I'm going to sell guys like Hicks. I'm going to sell guys like Allen Robinson. Hell, I might even sell guys like Khalil Mack, right? I don't think that was ever going to happen. But what I am interested in is kind of how bad these contracts were designed for tradability anyways. There's not a lot of teams in the league that are willing to accept some of these contracts. Andy Dalton had a pretty sizable contract, 1 year, $10 million for a trade. I look at the teams like the Saints, who desperately need quarterbacks in the league right now. Washington football team is still a team out there. Heineke may not be the answer, is most likely not the answer. So there are definitely teams that could use an Andy Dalton, could use a Nick Foles. But there's also a team called Chicago that could use an Andy Dalton, that could use a Nick Foles, that to assist Justin Fields in development, number one. But they're still the best backups in the league. So if Justin does go down, unfortunately, hope God he doesn't. But we do have a serviceable backup room. So, I don't know. Maybe we got a little too excited, a little too high, maybe thinking that we were going to comp some draft picks. And I saw this on Twitter, and I think it's really smart. If I remember the person who said it, it'd be great. Draft picks are great until you draft a player. Until you wait a couple years after you draft the player, because you never know what you're going to get, right? You can either use the boat, that is Khalil Mack or Allen Robinson, that is going to use you or be serviceable for a couple years, or you can trade that and hope that you're going to find the next Randy Moss, or you end up with the next Kevin White, right? Like there is no guarantee with a draft pick, but there at least is guarantee with a player that is developed on your roster over a set amount of years. This also signals another thing for me, number two, talking about Allen Robinson, is if the Bears really wanted to trade him, they would have done so at this deadline because they understand that after this tender, very unlikely that they're going to get anything for him unless they anticipate bringing him back onto a new contract. We haven't heard anything about that. Odds are he walks this offseason, but it's really telling to me that they don't trade him and are willing to just let him walk at the end of the day, when they could get at least some value out of it. So I think there's something there. I'm not trying to read too much into, a bucket of black paint, but I think there's something there.
Yeah, look, the Allen Robinson saga has been so up and down for the Bears because Bears fans have been begging and screaming for basically the last 2 seasons now. Hey, can you get this damn extension done and just get it over with? And I think at this point in life, or at this point in time, at this point in life, I guess you could say that too. It's just very clear that Allen Robinson doesn't want to be back because every single time I've been in a press conference and I've listened to Allen Robinson talk, every time you pull up any of his interviews, there's always the question that comes up about, hey, A-Rob, what's the new contract looking like? And what does Allen do? He just absolutely brushes it off and is just like, yeah, whatever. That's not my main focus right now, which is a totally valid thing because some players do prefer to not have a contract decision looming over their head during the season. Why? Because during the season, it's such a short turnaround, and you as a player, you're just mentally in the headspace you are in is game after game after game, practice, practice, practice. So it's totally fine for Allen Robinson to brush off contract talks till the offseason. But I think the radio silence this past offseason was very telling because it was pretty. The Bears basically, I mean, let's flash back basically 8 months at this point, right? The Bears hand out the franchise tag to A-Rob, and it's pretty much, yeah, you know what? This is how it's going to be, and we're just going to handcuff you. Now, I'm not going to get into an argument or a debate about how the franchise tag gives teams leverage and players feel like they don't have any leverage. But the point is the fact that the Bears could have let Robinson walk in the 2021 offseason, didn't do so, slapped the franchise tag on him as a last resort, and then months and months went by, and there was absolutely zero traction towards a long-term deal. And now the trade deadline's come and gone. Basically means that we have, 8-9 games left of Allen Robinson in a Bears uniform. And let me just say this for the record. Robinson's production's down. He's headed for basically what's probably going to be a career worst year because he's only had one time all season where he's had more than 4 receptions in a game, or it might be 1 or 2 times. But the point is that sometimes in the NFL, what tends to happen is this. And again, Allen Robinson's a fan favorite, so people don't want to see him go. Similar to guys like Akeem Hicks. And it was the same thing with Kyle Fuller, by the way. But the point is that sometimes what happens is in the NFL is that 2 parties just need to head for a divorce, and a divorce is badly needed because both parties need a fresh start. Why do I bring that analogy up? Because the Bears have shown, hey, we're ready for life without Allen Robinson, and Allen Robinson's shown, I'm ready for life without the Bears. Now, the only reason they're keeping Allen Robinson around in 2021, I can confidently tell you guys this, is because they view having another good wide receiver crucial to Justin Fields' development. Yeah, A-Rob's not going to be with the Bears in 2022, but also whatever reps and development Justin can get courtesy of Allen Robinson is going to be super important. And I know that there was talk back when the Bears drafted Justin Fields earlier in the season when Justin eventually was ready to take over as the full-time starter. Hey, could Justin Fields be the reason Allen Robinson stays in Chicago? I think through 6 starts right now, even that ship has sailed. And also, speaking of trades and quarterbacks, like you mentioned a couple moments ago before I went on my tirade, I mean, let's shout out Mr. Patrick Mahomes, who is struggling so hard he doesn't even look like the guy that everyone thought was going to be greater than Tom Brady. So I'm going to give it a couple more days, another week or 2 before the truthers emerge, and we hear QB1 chance for our buddy Mitch Trubisky, which, side note, if you're the Saints, I don't know why you're going to go into the season with Taysom Hill and Trevor Siemian the rest of the season. Should have traded for someone like a Mitch Trubisky or Andy Dalton, especially Mitch Trubisky, because Ryan Pace drafted him thinking he would be Drew Brees 2.0, which, again, the potential and stuff is definitely there for Mitch to develop into like a Drew Brees light or just a Drew Brees style quarterback who could fit Sean Payton's offense. The problem is that Mitch is still in Buffalo, and wherever he ends up next year, he's probably going to end up being a starter. So just prepare yourself for that. But yeah, I'm ready for the Mitch Trubisky's QB1 and not Patrick Mahomes tweets to surface. And I'm ready for the core argument to be, well, look at Mahomes. He was successful the first 3 or 4 years and absolutely crashed in year 5. And look at Mitch. He was given time to sit and develop. And year 5, year 6, he finally took off.
Yeah, that'd be hilarious. I feel like that's definitely going to happen too. Wherever Brian Dable goes, like we said, he's probably going to bring Mitch with him, his Project Frankenstein. pet quarterback to rule the league over for the next season. The next Tom Brady. We said it here first, folks. But with the absence of Allen Robinson, who most clearly isn't playing like a wide receiver one right now, we're looking at his stats. He only has 26 receptions for 271 yards, and that makes one wonder if that's entirely because of just how poor the passing game is right now. Just taking a quick look at the rest of the free agents into the 22 season, off season. The big names obviously are Allen Robinson, Chris Godwin, Devontae Adams. Those are your top three. Zero shot Devontae leaves Green Bay. One must wonder how likely it is that Chris Godwin leaves Tampa Bay. That might be an interesting area of concern for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, considering how they retained all of their Super Bowl winning talent. They might have an interesting cap scenario here coming up. Have to do some more researching on that. But when I'm looking down the list of names and guys that really stand out to me, one name comes up a lot. And he's not necessarily wide receiver one, area, but he's serviceable and he's definitely good. And guess what? He's young, and that's Zach Pascal. I think he's Zach Pascal. I think he's a name for Bears fans to watch coming this offseason. I think the Indianapolis Colts are looking at a potential situation where they're going to let some talent walk and reassess their roster. And at 26, entering his 27th year on this earth, he definitely looks like a guy that could be a really good tool on this offense. He's not only quick, he's not only good on the route, he has good hands. So I think he's a good pairing for Darnell Mooney down the line. I think the issue with Allen Robinson is a guy who's just a purely possessional receiver. This offense is built on yards after catch, but we have one of the worst yards after catch wide receiver in the league right now. With Allen Robinson, and if you watch the tape, you just look at his feet, and his feet are always off the ground when he grabs a ball for some reason. Not sure why. Maybe that's just old school teaching. It's not to discredit Allen Robinson's ability as a wide receiver. His skill set wise, absolutely top 10 in my opinion. I think he's a fantastic wide receiver. Just kind of stuck in a bad situation. Probably go off, have Devontae Adams like year next year on New England, and have Mac Jones look much better than he is or somewhere else. But this is an interesting free agency for wide receivers because it's primarily old guys who are past their primes, with a few young guys sprinkled in who most certainly can make impacts on your team if you're able to peel them away from re-signing with the teams that they're currently on. So when we look at Allen Robinson specifically, there might be a long-term plan already set up. If they weren't willing to move him now, there's probably most likely something going on behind the scenes that we just don't know about yet. Akeem Hicks, I'm not surprised at all that he hasn't been traded yet. We've been talking about Akeem Hicks as a trading chip for like 2 years now, and he just hasn't left. I don't really know what else to say about that. It's clear he doesn't want to leave. It's clear that the defense that sees him as an invaluable piece, even in the locker room if he's not playing. I think what we need to remember is the invaluable experience of veterans in the locker room. I think Ryan Pace knows that he has a good group of young guys who need guys around him to develop them. And I think that Akeem Hicks is one of the most vocal interior defensive linemen in the league. And I think he's incredibly important for the development of folks like Khyiris Tonga, and even Bilal Nichols as he continues to grow in his career, and Eddie Goldman, who's back and having, he's struggling to get back to form, but at least he's playing. So there's a lot to look at with this defense, and I think that there's just looking at some free agent contracts down the line, there are serious areas of concern that we know Cap has to be dedicated to. But unfortunately, Ryan Pace has kind of put this team in a position where we're paying a lot of guys to do a lot of nothing. And Ryan Pace really doesn't hedge his bets very well. He likes to go all in a lot. And so far, he's had a lot more misses than home runs, unfortunately. But before I pass it over to you, outside of Khalil Mack, I want to say Herbert. We're already at that time of the year where it's Khalil Herbert season instead of Khalil Mack season, and Allen Robinson. What other guys can you say? Yeah, we picked up outside of draft that go, wow, they really did make a huge difference on this team. it's difficult. I'm like really reaching here, so I don't think that there is an answer really.
Yeah, you're right. There really isn't an answer because again, when you look at some of these players, I mean, again, Danny Trevathan, the guy that's here from the John Fox days. Now, Trevathan was signed because he was very familiar with John Fox in Denver, which is totally fine. He's developed into a pretty good linebacker for the Bears defense. It's just the issue with Trevathan is that he's looked noticeably slower. The knee injuries have cost him, and he's really only played 2 full seasons since signing with the Bears in 2016. So ultimately, you're looking at this and you're saying, yeah, there really weren't a lot of tradable pieces for the Bears anyway, because it's like, okay, what were you going to get for David Montgomery? A player that's halfway through his third season and has taken a lot of contact. For Akeem Hicks, you were gonna be lucky, I think, for Akeem Hicks to get a Calais Campbell style deal, which was I think 2 4th round picks and a 5th round pick. More so if the Bears had gotten a fifth or a sixth out of Akeem Hicks, it would have been totally fine. And then again, Allen Robinson, Khalil Mack, like Khalil Mack, okay, when healthy, is he one of the best pass rushers in the game? Absolutely, no one's denying that, and he's going to continue to be. But his return, I think, would have been the hot point of contention. Same thing with Allen Robinson. You have Bears fans out there that are saying, oh, well, let's trade these guys for first, second-round picks. Well, odds are just because you view the return on Hicks and Mack as first or second-round picks, teams around the league are going to scout and grade players differently. Why? Simply because of things like contract, things like scheme fit. And I hate to break it to you guys, but right now, the Bears have very few contracts that are actually tradable. What I think no one's realizing is this: the common theme this trade season was that all the players who had untradeable contracts were the subject of trade rumors, irrespective of David Montgomery. You're looking at Khalil Mack, untradeable in terms of the contract. Allen Robinson, Akeem Hicks, yeah, you could have, but he's also in the last year of his deal. And players that typically have expiring contracts going into a contract year, well, those guys are generally tradable anyway. They have at least some value because Akeem Hicks right now, what he would have been is this: for a team that's looking to make a push to the Super Bowl, Akeem Hicks could have been that final piece. And there's only 2 teams around the league right now, I can tell you comfortably, that would have actually traded for Akeem Hicks, and that's the Chargers. Why? Because Akeem's buddies, Brandon Staley and Jay Rogers, are there, or the Chargers AFC West counterparts in the Denver Broncos, because Mr. Vic Fangio and Ed Donatel are there. That's pretty much about it. The other 30 or 29 teams, I should say, wouldn't even touch Akeem Hicks. So ultimately, you look at this, and the Bears just had very few tradable contracts. Now, moving on here, I mean, what does this mean for Ryan Pace? Because if you're Ryan Pace right now, and you talked about him going all in, there's times he also sits on his hands. Well, the trade deadline's an example of Ryan Pace sitting on his hands. When the draft and free agency comes around, Ryan Pace is a complete 180. But I think what this means for Ryan Pace is that he's pretty much been told by the guys upstairs and George McCaskey and Ted Phillips, hey, you're back for 2022. And the reason I bring that up is because the roster that he assembled, he was unwilling to tear it down. It's not like he was told, hey, you know what? We need to basically tear everything down and you better start looking for deals for Robinson and Akeem Hicks and Khalil Mack and why, because we want to build around Justin Fields. It's not like he was told that. Ryan's basically confident that some of this roster is under contract for the next couple seasons. And what we have right now, all we need to do is add on to it in the offseason to go ahead and to build around Justin Fields. That's ultimately what's going on. And in terms of, you mentioned the free agent wide receivers. Look, next offseason, here's what's going to have to happen. The Bears are already limited on draft capital. They don't have a first round pick or a 4th round pick. You could add a compensatory pick in there, hopefully, for whatever the Bears get for guys like Allen Robinson leaving via free agency, which is hopefully going to be a 3rd or 4th or a 5th. Which, side note, the Bears absolutely suck when it comes to 3rd round picks. When a running back, David Montgomery, is your best 3rd round pick in 7 seasons, tells you all you need to know about how bad the Bears are in the 3rd round. But the point is this: is that the Bears are gonna have to go out in free agency and find some depth at the wide receiver position. Same with the corner position. Hope that a starter or 2 ends up basically having a drier market than a lot of people expected, and then go ahead and double down or even triple down in draft and continue to add to those positions. that's just what's going to have to happen. Now, luckily for the Bears, the good news is that there's also certain positional units where Ryan Pace is going to have very few needs. So you're looking at offensive line. Well, the only guy you might really have to replace is Sam Mustipher. Even that, you could probably keep Sam Mustipher on the roster and do some shuffling. Then you're looking at the tight end position. You sure as hell better bring Jesse James back because he's basically developed into Justin Fields' best friend. Running back, you're pretty much set regardless of whether Damian Williams is back or not. The tackles, you got Borum and Jenkins who are going to be ready to go next season. I would say just have some good tackle depth, which you could retain players like Wilkinson on a cheap 1-year deal. On the defensive side of the ball, I mean, you need another really good off-ball coverage linebacker. Doesn't have to be Roquan Smith material, but just needs to be solid enough to the point where that player can step in. And if a guy like a Trevathan or an Ogletree go down, you look at safety. Look, Houston, Carson, Bush, you guys are great, but Tashawn Gibson's not getting the job done. And I truly believe this, that if DeAndre Houston Carson or Deion Bush were ready to start, Tashawn Gibson would not be on this roster. And then you're looking at the cornerback position. I mean, Vilder, Shelley, Jalen Johnson, you guys are great. The only legit starter right now is Jalen Johnson. Kendall Vildor's a serviceable cornerback, but you still need to have some competition to push him and just add to that room because you sorely need it. And then looking at the pass rush room, I mean, Rob Quinn's getting a year older. Then you've got Trevis Gibson, who continues to emerge. So ultimately, I think what's going to have to happen is you're just going to have to look at a possible scenario where you move on from Robert Quinn next offseason, and then you go ahead and you basically give Travis Gibson that starting job, but then you let some other young talent like a Charles Snowden, Sam Kamara step in because those guys flash tons of potential.
Yeah, I mean, just quick, good breakdown of all that talent wise. People who are leaving contract wise. What I look at immediately is $18 million paid out to Andy Dalton and Nick Foles, right? To just basically sit behind Justin Fields and tell him what he's doing is good or tell him what he's doing is wrong. $8 million to Jimmy Graham to sit on the bench and come in for maybe 1 to 2 plays a game. Jermaine Ifedi, 4.2, going to be really hard justifying bringing him back for the same amount of money. Tashawn Gibson, like you mentioned, most likely gone after this year. Very difficult to bring him back. Bears most likely targeting a safety in the draft. Bears most likely targeting a linebacker in the draft. Those are crucial elements right now. Like you said, Danny Trevathan just isn't older. They thought maybe they get some good more years out of him. They thought he'd be enough to pair with Roquan at the moment. Just looked like that's not going to happen. Damiere Byrd, there's a lot of guys on this team that are 1-year stopgap options. That will probably continue, unfortunately, I think, next year. Looking at that wide receiver market, we were fortunate that the wide receiver market in 2021 offseason was dry. That's why Allen Robinson, I feel, was a bit, hesitant. Kenny Golladay was signed for basically a steal at the end of the day for what the Giants had to pay for him. Chicago Bears were in that conversation, by the way. And this is, me speculating 100% here, but Kenny Golladay was basically kept overnight in New York City right after meeting with the Chicago Bears. And it really came down to the Bears and the Giants at the wire. And I'm something in my gut is telling me that the Bears said, look, we can get Kenny Golladay for less than what we're offering you on a franchise tender, Allen. Either you sign this right now or we're going to separate, and you're probably not going to get as much guaranteed. Kenny ended up getting more than the $17.8 million that Allen got. But at the end of the day, I think there were some hardline negotiations, and it's very, 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 if one thing went differently, Kenny Golladay could have been our wide receiver 1 going down the line here. But it's just the way that things work. It's all about deals. It's all about negotiation. Unfortunately, it's not Madden, where if you just increase the amount of money, players are automatically going to sign with your team, or increase the amount of years, players are going to automatically sign with your team. There's a lot of intangibles involved. Market means a lot. Location means a lot. System, schemes, all of these different things mean a lot. These agents, it's primarily what they're looking at is money's important, right? For themselves, the agents and the players alike. But there's a lot of other intangibles that are really important. So we're gonna continue to look at this free agent market. We're gonna watch some of these guys throughout the season, and I'm excited personally to start getting into some draft guides here and start doing some scouting. But at the end of the day, I have to agree with you that Ryan Pace is most likely back. I think this is a sign of him saying that he's not going anywhere. You know, there was a great comment on one of our last videos that was mentioning that Matt Nagy was involved in a lot of this roster as well. And he's right? Like you have to look at draft classes and you have to go, well, the head coach had a clear decision in making some of these positions or these selections. And he's right. So to both of their credit, Matt Nagy and Ryan Pace, they are great at talent assessment. Most of the studs on this team have come directly from the draft. That's kind of rare these days, I feel, in the NFL or across sports in general, when you're able to home grow a lot of this talent, being able to identify that, pick it from rounds all the way up to the 7th round. It really is impressive. But unfortunately, that hasn't really translated well, because if that's the method that the Bears are going to take into becoming a winning franchise, that's a method that's going to take years, because you're not making the quick cash grabs of let me acquire talent using some of my cap space. Instead, it's going, let's take 4 or 5 years to develop a guy into an all-pro, and then we'll move forward with him. You don't win games quick like that. So, you know, I hesitate to say let's get rid of Ryan Pace, because I think he's done a good enough job. I'm pro Pace. Like I'm willing to take the flack and the heat for it. But that's my take at the deadline. My ramble is over.
Well, we certainly go on rambles on here, and it's totally warranted. But look, I'm gonna make the one last point here. Matt Nagy's basically he's had a say in the roster. He had a say in trading up for guys like David Montgomery. You look at, because again, David Montgomery, I think a lot of people tend to forget, coming out of Iowa State, was viewed very closely as a player who was comparable to some guy named Kareem Hunt. And again, if you remember the 2019 offseason, Kareem Hunt was a free agent that offseason as well. And Matt Nagy, personally, I can tell you right now, went to ownership and vouched for him. That's my quick tidbit of the day. But then ownership was like, absolutely not, because of the domestic situation. So ultimately, when you look at this, I think what Ryan Pace is also saying is this is, hey, whatever talent I have, let me keep that around, because Matt Nagy certainly squandered it, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the next head coach is going to squander it as well. And really, we're going to try and, I mean, we use this video, guys, to figure out the whys of why the Bears decided to make no moves at the deadline, why Matt Nagy may or may not be back, because he's probably still staying at his undisclosed location, which is not really an undisclosed location, because I know word is out there and I know where he's staying. I'm just not going to mention it. I'll tell Maxx after this. I'm going to tease the rest of you guys. I'm so sorry. But anyways, we're going to get out of this thing, because I'm going to go have dinner. Maxx is going to go for his run. Make sure you're following us on Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, TikTok, and Instagram at Fireside Bears. Be sure to follow Maxx and myself on Twitter at Maxx Smith ESM and at Usayd Coach Show. We're going to be back Thursday afternoon, guys, with the breakdown of Bears Steelers on Monday Night Football, which our friends with the Manning cast unfortunately won't be there, but that's okay.
I don't blame them.
Yeah, maybe they'll be there for Bears Vikings in late December. But peace out, guys. Have a great rest of your week. We'll catch you guys next week.